All right, here we go. Wednesday. Let's see. You got your homework. All right, it was worksheet. Once again, I'm going to show you the answers. You're going to check your work and then go on the Google Forms and answer how many you got wrong. Just remember, as always, if you're having any issues, we got 2 days to get these things done. So don't come to class saying I didn't get number 14. I should be getting an email saying, "Hey, give me a hand, Mr. C, on number 14." All right, here's your answers. Go ahead, pause the video, correct, and then answer question 1 on Google Forms. Okay, hopefully you did fine. If you still have questions, send me an email. Let's see, calendar. I've already posted your grades on your quizzes. I am making this video literally on the day that you're taking the quiz, so therefore I have no idea how you did. However, if there's any questions on what you did, please send me an email. And I guess if Friday there's any issues I need to talk about the quiz, I'll put those since I'll be making that video for Friday, probably somewhere around Wednesday-ish. Okay, here's your homework tonight. Oh, it's from the book, no worksheet. Okay, brand new stuff. Brand new stuff. Absolute value equations and inequalities. In the past, sometimes I've done this in 2 days. I will say this. Once you understand what's going on, how to do it, there's not much going on here. I will warn you, however, if you're not paying much attention, this is challenging stuff. If you are paying attention, this is pretty simple. Okay. All right, so 3 things. We're basically going to be solving equations and inequalities. You're like, I already know how to do this. The only difference is it's going to involve an absolute value. All right, so think about this. If I give you this equation right here, x equals 9, how many answers are there? How many values are there that are absolutely equal to 9? Well, there's 1. There's 9, right? Now, you could say I could write 9 as 6 plus 3, but simplified, it would still be just one answer, 9. That is not the case when we get to absolute value equations. For absolute value equations, it turns out there's not just one answer here, there are 2 answers. Well, I can plug 9 into the absolute value. Remember, absolute value, ask yourself, what between those 2 vertical lines, what is the distance between that and 0? Or how far are you away from 0? That's what absolute value does. They're not parentheses, although they do act like parentheses. It asks the questions, how far are you away from 0? So how far is 9 away from 0? 9. So the absolute value of 9 is 9. Well, there's one answer, but the problem is that there's another answer that's true as well. I mean, negative 9 is 9 units away from 0. So for absolute value equations, right, there ends up being 2 answers. Well, great. Okay, we knew this one. I believe that was, we learned this way back in chapter 1. The issue comes when I have an equation. There's 2 possible answers to this. So how would we use algebra and solve this equation? That's what today's class is, and we're also going to combine it with inequalities. So today we're going to be solving absolute value equations and inequalities. All right, there are 3 steps. We're going to do equations first. There are 3 steps to do this. So I'm going to show you the 3 steps. I want you to pause the video, write them down, as always. There are your 3 steps. Please write them down. Okay. And then we're just going to jump in and do them. But remember, there are 2 possible answers when you get absolute value. And this is kind of what the verbiage in those steps. So probably some of you are writing down the steps. You're like, I don't understand this. Well, we'll see how this works. Okay, so just remember, when you get it down to the absolute value symbol, there are 2 answers, the positive and the negative. And I don't want to say positive, negative. I just want to say the answer and the opposite answer. All right, so here's how it works. We are going to treat all absolute value equations when we solve them algebraically exactly the same way we solve algebra problems. In other words, we find the variable. Hey, where is the variable? There it is. It's inside the absolute value equations. And we get rid of things. We get rid of addition by subtraction, we get rid of multiplication, division, and the inverses of both of those as well, too. So the first thing I want to do to both sides is I want to subtract 2. So I subtract 2, and I get absolute value of x is equal to 7. And what happens is you continue this process until you get the absolute value symbols, and that's the only thing you're left with. I'm left with the absolute value symbols. When that's done, right, that's what step 1 was. We get the absolute value all by itself. When that's done, we're going to write two equations. The first equation is we just basically erase the absolute value symbols. See what I did there? The second equation, I'm going to erase the absolute value symbols, and whatever's on the other side, I'm going to write the opposite. What's the opposite of 7? The opposite of 7 is negative 7. Right? There is a step 3, right? It says solve each equation. For this one, there's nothing left to solve. Eventually, we'll see we have some stuff to do. Okay, so let's see. The two answers are 7 and negative 7. Those are the two answers that would make this equation true. Now, we like to be efficient or lazy in math, so we're going to write this as plus or minus 7. Okay, not all the answers will be plus or minus, but many of them will be. All right, let's do one together. All right, so step number 1 is we use algebra to get the absolute value symbols by themselves. So if you want to think of the whole absolute value as a variable, all right, you can do that. The reality is we're getting the absolute value symbol by itself. So what's attached to it? Well, there's a 2 attached to it. How's the 2 attached? It's attached by multiplication. How do we get the multiplication? We use division. Okay, so we divide both sides by 2. The 2's cancel. So you're left with the absolute value of x is equal to 5. So step number 1 is done. We've gotten the absolute value all by itself. There's no change in the algebra rules. Okay. Step number 2 is we write two equations. The first equation is written without the absolute value symbols, and the second one is written without, and we write the opposite of what's on the other side. The opposite of 5 is negative 5. Okay. Step 3 says solve both equations independently. Well, they're both solved. I mean, there's nothing left there to solve. There will be eventually. You'll see here. Therefore, we write the answer, x is equal to plus or minus 5. Makes sense? Okay, on your own, try this one, and then answer question number 2 on the Google Forms. How'd you do? All right, let's see. We got to get the absolute value symbol all by itself, so what's attached to it is minus 5. To get rid of minus 5, we add 5 to both sides. So we get the absolute value of x is equal to 6. We write the two equations as x equal to 6 and x is equal to negative 6. We solve, they're already solved. Therefore, the answer plus or minus 6. Okay, so those are the simple ones. Simple ones. Let's do one that has, I don't know, a bit more stuff to it. All right, check it out. Here's your first one. Well, you're like, well, I know what to do. I subtract 3 from both sides, but step 1 doesn't say that. Step 1 says get the absolute value symbols by themselves. So check it out. The absolute value symbol is by itself. There's nothing left. There isn't any plus 3 on the outside of the absolute value. There's nothing being multiplied. There's nothing being divided, added, or subtracted. All I'm left with is the absolute value. So in essence, step number 1 is done. So we immediately go to step number 2. So step number 2 says to write the two equations. The first one is, well, it's just written without the absolute value symbols. The second one is written without the absolute value, and we write the opposite of what's on the other side of the equal sign. Well, the other side of the equal sign is 4, so we write negative 4. Now you can see what we do with step 2. Step 2 now says to solve the equation. We won't get a plus or minus this time. So let's see, on the first equation, we got to subtract 3 from both sides. It gives me a 1. On the second equation, we subtract 3 from both sides. I don't get a negative 1. I get a negative 7. So this is one of those ors. So the answer to this one is either x is equal to 1 or x is equal to negative 7. Okay? Well, this isn't one of those compound inequalities, but this is certainly one where we got two answers. It's either 1 or it's negative 7. Okay? Make sense? All right, so let's see. Step number 1 says use algebra to get the absolute value symbols by themselves. So where's the absolute value? Okay, I see the absolute value symbols on the left side. What's attached to the absolute value symbols? Well, there's a 2. 2's not on the inside, it's on the outside. So we're going to get rid of that first. We're going to get rid of anything that's on the outside of the absolute value symbols. If I'm talking too fast, rewind. Okay, so to get rid of that 2, it's attached to the absolute value symbols by multiplication. We divide both sides by 2. The 2's cancel on the left, and on the right we get a 5. Hey, I got the absolute value symbols by themselves. So what do? I write my two equations. The first one is written without the absolute value symbols. The second one is written without, and then whatever's on the other side, in this case 5, we write the opposite of 5. The opposite of 5 is negative 5. Okay. Now we solve each one separately. The first one, the top one, let's see, add 1 to both sides, gives me a 6. On the second one, add 1 to both sides. I don't get a negative 6, I get a negative 4. So the two possible answers are t is equal to 6 or t is equal to negative 4. Make sense? All right, let's try a really tough one. Okay, so here we go. Let's see. We got a lot of stuff going on here. Our job is to get the absolute value symbols by themselves. So we got to get rid of the 2 and the positive 1. Which one is easiest to get rid of? Yeah, the 1. Let's get rid of the 1 first. And just like in algebra, we generally get rid of the addition and subtraction first. So we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. That gives me this. We're going to get rid of what's on the outside of the absolute value symbol. Now we're left with a 2 attached by multiplication. So we're going to divide both sides by 2. So we get that. We tracking? Okay. Let's see. We write our 2. Once we get the absolute value symbol all by itself, we write the 2 equations. The first one is written without the absolute value symbol. The second one's written without, and the opposite of 4 is -4. Solve each one separately. We add 1 to both sides. To the top one, that gives me 5. We add 1 to both sides on the bottom one. That gives me -3. Okay, so my 2 answers are 5 and -3, or 5 or -3. Okay. For those of you that need help on that, please rewind and watch those 3 examples one more time. For the rest of us, box number 4, this is question, I believe, number 3 on the Google Forms. If not, it's the one that says write the answers to box number 4. Do all 3 of these, and then come back and check your answers. Okay, did you answer Google Forms? If not, pause it, answer the Google Forms. Okay, well, let's see. The first one, divide both sides by 2. We'd write our 2 equations. Subtract 4 from both sides. That would give me -2. Subtract 4, -6. So I've got -2 or -6. Okay. For the middle one, add 1 to both sides. Divide by 3. Write my 2 equations. So we add 3 to both sides. Add 3 to both sides. So 4 or 2. In the back of the book, if you're checking your answers, they'll generally write it from the smallest to the largest. They'll say the answer is 2 and 4. And on that first one there to the left, they would say -6 and -2. Okay, so they go from least to greatest. But it can be written either way. All right, and on the last one, well, the absolute value is already by itself. So we write our 2 equations, subtract 9 from both sides, divide by 2. Subtract 9 from both sides, divide by 2. So we get -11 and 2. How'd you guys do? Okay, well, I've been keeping something from you. There is a huge, how many times can I say huge? There's a huge caveat to all of this. Take a quick note, okay? If you have an equation and you get the absolute value symbol all by itself, I'm going to get the absolute value symbol all by itself, and you're left with this. Right? This is one of these special tricky ones. Look what it says. It says the absolute value of x is equal to -3 if you ever solve an equation. Before you move to the other step, make sure what's on the other side is positive. There is no way to take the absolute value of anything and get a negative answer. The absolute value will always be a positive, because how far are you away from 0? It's always a positive value. So occasionally you might get an equation that asks you to solve that looks like this. You do all the stuff right. Don't assume that you can tell right from the very start of whether there's no solution or not. Just do the algebra until you get the absolute value symbol all by itself. Even if there's a whole bunch of stuff going on the inside, doesn't matter. Once you get the absolute value by itself, look to the other side. Make sure it's positive. In this case, we get a -3. There's no possible way to take the absolute value of anything and get a -3. So this one has no solution. A few of these tonight for homework. Be careful. Okay? All right, if you need to rewind that and hear that one more time, the basic story is get the absolute value by itself, look on the other side, make sure it's not negative. If it is negative, you put no solution, you're done. If it's positive, then you write your 2 inequalities and go from there. Okay. So I said today, sometimes I break this up into 2 classes, and sometimes I do it in 1. We're doing it into 1. I've done it the last couple of years. I've done this in 1, and it's been okay. So I'm going to continue that with you guys as well too. If it was a non-honors class, I'd definitely do this in 2 days. Okay, so we just did equations, right? We saw that when you get the absolute value of something, you get 2 answers. Okay, the question is, what would happen if you had an inequality? Well, for inequalities, we already know there's an infinite number of answers, not 2 answers. There's an infinite number of answers when you do inequalities. So let's look at this one. Let's see, what would make this true? Well, we know the absolute value only gives us positive answers. So when you take the absolute value of x, you only get a positive. So even though we know -10 is less than 9, if we put -10 in there, We'll take the absolute value of negative 10, you get 10. So 10 isn't smaller than 9. So in this case, while there are an infinite number of answers, they're very unique. They're very fine. We got to figure out what would happen. Okay, so what numbers would make this true? All right. Well, those would be any number that's smaller than 9, but bigger than negative 9. Any number that's smaller than 9, but bigger than negative 9. And I want you to take a look at that because this is one of the steps involved. When you get the absolute value by itself, you write it without the absolute value. You write it without the absolute value. You flip the inequality and you write a negative on the other side. That's what will be our two possible answers. So what numbers make this true? Any number smaller than 9, any number bigger than negative 9. For instance, 8 is smaller than 9. 8, the absolute value of 8 is 8. 8 is less than 9. Negative 8 is also smaller than 9 and bigger than negative 9. The absolute value of negative 8 is 8. 8 is smaller than 9. Okay, so there are techniques. Once again, take on your notes or whatever. I want you to write the steps. There's a bunch more of them, and it's a bit more complicated for inequalities. Okay, we got that copied that now. There's one more thing. Remember when we do inequalities, we have two possibilities. For compound inequalities, we have ands and ors, ands and ors. And remember, ands and ors look like this. The top one is an and the bottom one is an or. All right, now this is a kind of a complicated slide. I've used this for many years, and most kids, their eyes glass over. Well, what I want you to concentrate is what I just highlighted in reality world. So always remember that if we ever multiply or divide by a negative number, we have to flip the inequality. So for this particular one, we multiply both sides by negative 2, we would flip. Okay? However, on this one, we're going to multiply both sides by 2. Okay, so even though the answer is negative, right, we're not going to flip the inequality just because the answer is negative. We don't flip it because we're not multiplying by a negative. The previous one, we were multiplying by a negative 2. Okay, so that's a whole lot of stuff to keep in the back of your head. Let's just do a couple of examples and see if this is as complicated as I'm making it. All right, here's our first one. So if this was an equation, you guys would tear through this one. It's an inequality. So we got a couple new steps. So step number 1 says get the absolute value by itself. Just remember, if we ever multiply or divide by a negative number, we're going to flip the inequality. So let's see. Step number 1, get absolute value by itself. Well, I got to get rid of that at plus 2, so I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. Okay, that's not bad. Step number 2 says once you have the absolute value by itself, we write two inequalities. Two inequalities. Inequality number 1, all right? Oh, by the way, in box number 5, what do we got? A greater than or a less than? Oh, yeah, we got a less than. So this is going to be one of those ands. Okay, so keep that in mind. Let's see. Inequality number 1, we just write the same inequality without the absolute value. Inequality number 2, we get rid of the absolute value. We flip the inequality, and we write the opposite of the other side. The opposite of 7 is negative 7. Okay? All right. Since we're in an inequality world, we have to graph our answers. So let's see. And this is an and. So x is smaller than 7 but bigger than negative 7. And it would be open circles. And hopefully you haven't forgotten that stuff already. Make sense? So it's between negative 7 and 7. Any answer between negative 7 and 7 would make that inequality true. For instance, zeros between that. Let's see. Absolute value of 0 is 0. 0 plus 2 is 2. 2 is definitely less than 9. Okay. Let's see. 10 is not in the red section. So let's see. Absolute value is 10 is 10. 10 plus 2 is 12. 12 is not smaller than 9. That's how this kind of works. Okay. All right. Another example. Oh, box 5, let's see, is this an and or an or? Oh, it's a greater than, so therefore it's going to be an or. All right, step number 1 says do algebra and get the absolute value by itself. It is, so we can write our two inequalities. The first one is written without the absolute value symbol. The second one's written without. Flip the inequality and write the opposite of 1, which is negative 1. Okay? Makes sense? All right. Now, step number 3 is we solve each one independently. Subtract 5 from both sides. It gives me negative 4. Second one, subtract 5 from both sides. It gives me a negative 6. So this one is an or, so let's read it. Let's see. X is bigger than negative 4, but x is smaller than negative 6. And it's smaller than or equal to, so we need closed circles this time. So let's see, it's bigger than negative 4, so it goes in that direction, and it's smaller than negative 6, so it goes in that direction. So it looks like everything is an answer except for if we stick to integers, -5. -5 would not work. Check it out. Throw in -5. -5 plus 5 is 0. The absolute value is 0 is 0, and 0 is not bigger than 1. So, yeah, -5 would be the only integer that does not work. Any other integer would work. Make sense? All right, let's do one together. Here we go. Let's do one together. So we're in an inequality world. If we ever multiply or divide by a negative number, we flip the inequality. So step number 1, get the absolute value by itself. What do we got to get rid of? Oh, box number 5 would say that this one is and it's less than. All right, so let's see. Divide both sides by 3. The 3's would cancel on the left. We get 5. Now the absolute value is by itself. We write the two inequalities. The first one is written without the absolute value symbols. The second one's written without. We flip the inequality, and we make a 5 a -5. Make sense? All right, solve each one independently. Add 2 to both sides. That gives me a 7. Add 2 to both sides. It gives me a -3. This one is an and. So let's see. It's smaller than 7, but bigger than -3. And closed circle on both of those. So smaller than 7, but bigger than -3. And there you go. So anything in that red there is an answer. For instance, 2 is there. 2 minus 2 is 0. 0 times 3 is 0. 0 is definitely less than 15. Okay? Make sense? Obviously, I want you to do one by yourself. All right, do that one by yourself, get to the answer, answer Google form, and then come back and check your work. Okay, how'd you do? Well, absolute value is already by itself, so all we got to do is write the two inequalities. So we got those two inequalities. The first one, just erase the inequality or the absolute value symbols. The second one, erase, flip, make it opposite. Solve each one. So add 7 to both sides. Add 7 to both sides. This one is an and, so we're going to, let's see, it's got to be smaller than 9, but bigger than 5. Smaller than 9, bigger than 5. Open circles on both of those. Cool. All right. Yeah, I'll make you do 3 of them all by yourself now. Okay, so this is the last one on the Google Forms. Do all 3 of these, and then actually, you can't pause because the question says, do your graphs look like my graphs? So, yeah, go ahead and pause, get to the answers, play the video, and then answer the Google Forms. Okay, let's see. First one, the absolute value is already by itself, so we just simply need to write the two inequalities, flip the inequality, make 15 negative for the second one. Add 4 to both sides. That will give me 19 and -11. So let's see, it's smaller than 19, bigger than -11. Open circle on both of those. There's my graph. It's kind of hard to see. All right, second one, divide both sides by 2. Now the absolute value is by itself. Let's see. First one, second one, flip the inequality, make it -5. Subtract 1 from both sides. Subtract 1 from both sides. This one is greater than, so this one's going to be an or. So let's see. This has got to be bigger than 4, but smaller than -6. Bigger than 4, but smaller than -6. Open circle on both. And the last one, absolute value is already by itself, so we write the two inequalities. I flipped it, made it negative. Okay, so the first one, add 1 to both sides. That would be 8 divided by 2. That would give me a 4. And the second one, add 1 to both sides. That would give me -6 divided by 2. That gives me a -3. Let's see, this was a greater than, so this is also an or. So let's see, G is bigger than 4, but smaller than -3. Closed circle on both. Bigger than 4, smaller than that. My circle's not very good there. Yeah, that's not a mistake. That's just a formatting. So it's supposed to be -3 there. So the dot's just off slightly. All right, makes sense? Oh, so I guess technically the answer to yours, if you got all 3 right, would be no. My graphs don't look like yours, Mr. C, because mine are right and yours are wrong. At least the last one is wrong there. Okay. So with that, I guess we're done. Now, I'm not going to claim for some of you this isn't that challenging. It is challenging. Obviously, I'm doing this just by speaking. I don't have the interaction with you during the class, so you might have to watch this a couple times to get my techniques. It wouldn't be a bad idea to play this while you're doing your homework so you can hear me walk you through one. But for some of you, I know you're like, okay, I'm ready to do my homework right now. This isn't that bad at all. Okay, so with that, we'll close the class. Remember, this is your homework, and I will see you guys on Friday.